Hey everyone, Wanderbot here, and welcome back to another relaxing, calm, and collected past midnight episode of the Cookie Cast. I think this is actually the first time I've done a past midnight episode of the Cookie Cast, but that's fine. Oh, what would be worth getting? I mean, it seems like getting the shipment bonus would be pretty good. What else do we got? Clicking gains. Oh, right, I forgot. I'm supposed to be clicking here, aren't I? Look, I forget, like, every single time I load this up, partly because it keeps moving my gosh darn icon for the clicker. It moves it off my secondary monitor whenever I attach, like, a new display, which is, like, every, like, 20 minutes? Suffice to say, I do a lot. Anyway, what do we invest in? So, obviously, I could get another alchemy lab, which would certainly get me a decent chunk. I could also spend vanilla nebula, which would make each shipment. Yeah, that's worth it. 1% of you. Adamantium mouse might be worthwhile. I'll just get that because we're there, and let's get a pair of shipments. Because yeah, now they're worth a lot. All right, there we go. And now I'm making a million cookies per click. I know somebody was trying to tell me about like their own clicker script, and it's like it clicks like this fast. I'm like, I'm clicking once per millisecond. That's a lot of clicks. That's a lot of clicks right there. Anyway, oh, you know what? I should probably start getting some bank upgrades. But none of this is the Cookie Cast. This is just the usual preparatory business, where I just kind of, spend my cookies, intro a bit, finagle with the tech, and then we get down and dirty with the topics. So the topic for today, I guess as you guys probably saw in the title of the video, and in the thumbnail, is masculinity. I realize I'm going kind of, I don't want to say raw with some of these. Raw? I don't know. Unfiltered? Something. I would have expected me to talk about video games more, but I feel like if I'm going to be talking about video games, I want like charts and graphs and examples. The Cookie Cast, I think, might be a little bit more of an outpouring of emotions and thoughts that I've kept pent up for a while in a way that, maybe is unhealthy. Maybe it's somewhat repressed. Maybe it's kind of one of those where I feel slightly guilty for thinking or feeling some of these things. The number of ways that I could put this varies, but I feel like this is actually very intrinsic to some core part of my identity. Banks are twice as efficient, but boy, that costs 70 million. That's going to cost a lot. Alright, let's check Grimoire. What is the one that I'm supposed to go for? Where's the Hand of Fate? Oh. I see. Magic costs 10 plus 60% of max magic. Chance to backfire 15%. You can stack them. That's the point of it all. Let's see. Do I have a sugar lump? 8 hours to reach maturity. So when I wake up, I'll keep that in mind. And I'll spend it on something that'll give me a mini game. Anyway. So we're talking about masculinity. This is kind of one of those that's been on my mind, I mean, arguably, my entire life. I mean, of course, how could it not? I am a dude. Of course, masculinity is going to be at least part of my cognition. Okay, which is this? Oh. Big click boost. I'm gonna backfire Sinister Fate. Uh-oh, got a Wrath Cookie. I'm gonna wait until this one's over and done with. Unless it won't let me. I don't know. Wrath Cookies terrify me. It looks so demanding. Okay. And then we're gonna get a couple of shipments, and then Wrath Cookie. I lost... Well, that was like nothing. Well, that's easy enough. I need more wizard towers. Anywho. So, go figure. I'm a dude. I'm gonna think about masculinity. These are things that, anybody I think probably thinks about. Maybe some people don't. Maybe some people are very, very secure in who they are and what they are and where they belong in the world. But I'm actually one of those people, maybe. I think it's one of those that I've mostly been thinking about these things in hindsight, in how they've made my life harder, rather than, like, being confused or upset or bewildered by my place in the world, if that makes any sense. That, growing up, you really are presented with, or at least, my generation was presented with a very firm duality. Gay marriage wasn't even legal until I was almost, like, I was in my teens. And even then, like, it was kind of legal in a couple of places, but, like, I remember people being quite upset about, like, Proposition 8 and the Oberfeld decision and a couple other things. I forget some of the names, but, like, these are big pivotal moments that I was alive for and actually was, like, following in the news, being very excited for. And I'm sure, a number of you guys and gals, guys and gals, I like guys as just kind of like a generic dudes. Dudes maybe is kind of, I'm going to try and enforce dudes as a gender neutral. It's never going to work, but I love dude. I love saying dude and even guys as kind of gender neutrals, even though both of those are sourced originally in masculine language. Really, a lot of things loop back to this, and it frustrates me. Because I feel like our world would have been better if we had spent less time being wrapped up in gender to begin with, and gender roles, and, how gender should be one way or another. Stuff like that, I feel like it always just kind of holds us back in a bad way, as opposed to really letting us progress in a healthy and holistic manner. Growing up, you really are, at least, for me in the 90s and the 2000s, you're really, I was, I guess, maybe not everybody was, but we were generally presented with a very strong dichotomy between the genders. Guys are rough, tough, tumble, sports, yeah, sure, they're the nerdy guys, but they don't really count. Guys are beer drinkers, burger eaters, rough and tumble. They do manual labor. They do the hard thing. They care about cars. They care about, once again, beer, burgers, meat, steaks, grilling, outdoorsy stuff, maybe. And girls are much more, Barbie dolls and fashion and, I guess, drama, question mark, and some other things. Like, I think, it would be remiss of me to completely say, like, these are completely separate from our biology. Some of these things are somewhat intrinsic, but I feel like so much of it is more kind of enforced by tradition, that this is the way it's always been, and that's why this is the way it always should be. If that makes sense, that there's kind of this odd, staunch enforcement of how things are and should be, and that often leads to, at least in my mind, oh yeah, we don't have any of those. Never mind then. It often leads to kind of this, like, weird, I don't want to say it's Stockholm syndrome, but it kind of is, where effectively it becomes traditional to enforce these norms, even though, like, a lot of people might not even care for it. It's almost impossible to say straight face that, like, as a male, I would be hard pressed to believe somebody that says, like, I've never cared about anything that is in some way, shape, or form traditionally, not masculine. If there was a guy that said, like, I'd never cared about fashion, or I have no interest in cooking, I fit the man's man stereotype, I'd be like, no, you're hiding something. There's something in there. But that our society has stigmatized the idea of people being open about this, in a way of, like, dudes don't care about fashion. If you care about fashion, you are either a woman or you're not really a man. or you don't really, Barbies are purely for girls, or emotions are for girls. And, you know, I feel like this is just perpetuated by people who were told this when they were younger, and that the cycle just keeps getting looped through our society forever, and that it's kind of nice for me seeing that that's not necessarily true anymore. Recently I started watching, I started watching a bunch of different shows recently. I mean, obviously, they're on TV. But I was recently watching, like, Owl House, for example. And that specifically has one of the first specifically openly lesbian characters that Disney has ever had. That is like an official lesbian couple. I don't entirely remember what the superlative of it was. Or not superlative. I don't exactly remember why it was so important. But suffice to say, it was, a relatively progressive portrayal of, a lesbian romance to some degree. I think one of the characters is bi, one is lesbian. And that's simply something that just was not acceptable for me growing up. No show would ever show that. There might be a hint here and there. There might be a hint that, like, so-and-so might have some kind of background. But, like, I grew up when Ace Ventura: Pet Detective somewhat demonized the idea of having a trans woman, as the villain, and they kind of ran it as like a boogeyman thing, more than, just being like, yeah, they're a trans woman, but also they're evil. There was enough of a plot focused around, I think, even disrobing her and trying to get a look at various people's genitals to figure out, oh no, it wasn't looking at the genitals, it was looking at the rings, but he was doing it in the bathroom for some reason because Ace Ventura is a moron. But there was, it became less about, them as a villain and more about their status as a trans woman, and it felt gross and it wasn't fun to deal with, but it was funny for everybody because it was funny to make fun of those things. And so I've spent a lot of time over the last couple of years really just kind of noodling over the idea of, like, all the various tropes of masculinity and how often they kind of ruin people. Growing up, especially in middle school, I had a lot of friends. They weren't really friends. I wasn't in that specific school system for long enough to make friends with anybody. Not, like, particularly close friends, but there was a significant portion of the population that had no interest in school because they were going to go off and become an athlete. They were all playing basketball, they were all playing lacrosse, they were all playing football. That's all they cared about, and that's all they did. And when it came to classes, well, they just ended up shunted into the lowest level classes where they don't have to try anymore, and the teachers aren't trying to educate them either. And it more was kind of teenage babysitting services than actual education. And it was frustrating because I dipped into a couple of those once or twice because I often was switching school districts. And a number of the higher end classes, either I was woefully unprepared for. So, imagine joining, I switched schools and would have gone from, being pretty deep in, like, weather system sciences, having to then go straight into, like, human body sciences and really understand, like, what the heck an amygdala is for a pop quiz right then and there. They made me do that, and then they realized that, like, I didn't know shit about the human body, and so instead of trying to catch me up, they just said, whatever, we're just gonna chuck you in with the dumb kids. And so I was stuck with the dumb kids for a while, and that was frustrating because I didn't learn anything there, and it was just an opportunity for, these kids to bully me because I was the outsider, and I was actively trying to learn. And I felt bad because the teacher was legitimately trying, and just couldn't. It really was teenage babysitting services. Kids would actively try and get in-school suspensions because then they wouldn't have to even pretend to be going to class. It was gross, and I hated it. Do we get another one of these? I mean, I guess. It's a 2% increase every time I click one of those. which is nice. It's a boost. But yeah, so like sports kind of created this system where everybody, it was okay to ignore school as long as you were good or focused on sports. But let me tell you, like, of the amount of people that commit to sports in school, you know, of all of those kids that you see that are amazing at sports or were amazing at sports, 99% of them, it's way more than that, never go off to become an athlete. And if they do, they usually end up just as kind of a bench warmer amongst the even better students. My cousin was, I'm gonna say he was a pretty good quarterback, but he wasn't ever amazing. The dude was a block. Born a block, still a block. And I'm gonna buy as many curses as I can. There we go. But born a block, still a block. Dude does not move. Was not very fast, but like if you want to put him in front of somebody, it's gonna be difficult to get through him. But that's all he was good at, and ultimately there were better linebackers than him, just in terms of like speed and strength and some other things. He was just a somewhat immobile wall. And so he never really cared about school, mainly because I think he always thought himself to be dumb. He didn't think he was a particularly smart guy, so he never bothered to learn, and he never felt like he needed to, because he was going to go off and be one of those football guys. And he did. You know, he hit college, and you know what he did? He did football for like 7 years, but he never got a degree because he wasn't there for football. He was there for sports. He was there to be manly. He was there to do manly things. And then the whole system failed him. They just kicked him out and said, yeah, you're too old for college football at this point. And he had no hope of going pro. And he had no degree to fall back on. I haven't seen him in 15 years now. I have no idea what he's up to, but you know, every time I'd like try and figure out what happened, it sounded like he was just kind of getting by with minimum wage out in the country, and that's not a good place to be. I feel like the system kind of failed him because there was kind of this expectation that he'd go off and do sports, and that's what his. I feel like this isn't even a podcast about masculinity. This is just a podcast where I'm like, sports ruins people. But, you know, so often you hear the story of, like, school is paying, like, $1 million for the new sports stadium. And it's like, and then you look at it and, you know, maybe you look at the school's curriculum and they don't even have a computer science course. Or if they do, it's, like, tiny and wildly underfunded. You know, the art courses are pitiful. The expanded education is non-existent. All you have are your basic science, math, English, and history. And then everything that is bonus is purely just language, and maybe because some teacher was motivated to do so. I actively tried to take classes for computer science, you know, when I was in high school, and I got lucky that I got into web design and animation, that those classes kind of existed. But that's just because the old typist teacher who was tenured and, you know, close to retiring wanted to teach those, and they just kept him around because sure, why not? We'll just chuck in the sports kids into the web design and animation courses because no one else wants to do them. And, you know, it's not like the teacher was actually particularly good at either. All he did was use his position to just bully the students that were trying harder. May have a bit of a chip on my shoulder for that one. But that it was this kind of self-feeding cycle of punching downwards without ever thinking about uplifting anybody. And so I was quite frustrated to hear that, yes, once again, the school has earmarked $1 million to redo the football field, and, you know, the art program, the teacher is still spending money out of her own pocket to get us enough supplies to do various interesting projects. And it's just infuriating to see that kind of thing, because it's sports, I'm gonna say, for most people, caps out after the 30. Like, you know, after a person turns 30. You know, maybe you get a couple of professional athletes that can go on for long and storied careers, but most people get old and dumpy, or slow, and more fragile the older they get. And even beyond that, the younger people often end up with concussions and all sorts of issues that carry with them. And so it always frustrated me seeing this cycle of focusing on something that truly felt it truly felt wasteful and abusive, and so much of it was because our society really just kind of entrenched itself around the idea of sports. I'm gonna just rename this episode Sports. We'll talk about masculinity for next episode. Sure, why not? Just because I'm 20 episodes in, or 20 minutes in, and my notes for masculinity go on and on. But I think starting with sports is a good segue into the rest of this. But you know, so much of the schooling system was about getting kids into sports, getting kids to participate in sports, getting kids to participate in competitive leagues, pitting schools against each other, track meets, and so on and so forth. And it was always really frustrating for me because I had limited to no interest in any of these things. But you had to do something. You know, my parents weren't going to just let me coast through school without doing some level of physical exercise. And so when I was young, it was soccer. I tried baseball for a bit, but Little League was kind of boring. You know, you spend half your time sitting on a bench or standing in a field, and then maybe occasionally you have to sprint for a bit. And that works for some people, but that's not great. So we switched over to soccer, which worked well. It was a good way to get me to run, but I don't know if I was like a sick kid or what, but half the time I felt like passing out on the field. So I was never big on that. Tried lacrosse, and it was kind of the same way. I also kept getting hit in the parts that the pads didn't cover, and let me tell you, taking a lacrosse ball to the knee or the soft part of your armpit is brutal and makes it really hard to continue to do sports. I think it was the side of the knee. I think you had to have knee pads on? I forget. I honestly forget, but it just didn't seem like it was worth it. And, you know, frankly, with so many of these sports, the kids were mean. It sucked. I must have been in like third or fourth grade. So like 11 or 12, give or take. So maybe a little bit older than third or fourth grade. But my brother and I were on a team together. We would generally always be on a team. They would effectively have two age levels that would be put together. And so sometimes I'd be the older age bracket, and sometimes they'd be the younger, and vice versa with my brother. I don't entirely know why they did that system. Probably because they didn't have enough players to really fill out a full league. And so you just kind of have this weird alternating, you know, third and fourth graders are together, fifth and sixth graders are together, that kind of thing. And so what that often meant was that my brother and I were kind of bouncing from team to team. It was very rare that we'd actually have the same coach, or, you know, team name, jersey, whatever, multiple years in a row. There were kids that would stick with these coaches, you know, so effectively you'd have the entrenched coach that would stick with one group of students. And then you'd have a bunch of other filler players that would just get added to the team at the beginning of each season for whatever reason. And unfortunately what that meant is that you had the kind of I'm almost going to say the varsity and the junior varsity, but you had the group of people that, you know, were quite skilled, knew what they were doing, and, you know, were used to playing with each other. And then the out group of people that had never worked with these kids before, never seen them before, had no real connection to them, so on and so forth. And unfortunately what that led to was an egregious amount of hazing and bullying, and it was quite brutal, just being part of that. And trying, like, every single time I tried to join a sports team, it pretty much went the exact same way. I'd be the new guy, there would be an excessive amount of hazing, pretty much no opportunity to become part of the in-group unless I forced myself to be there for a while. And then I'd eventually lose interest because that shit sucks. And so I never spent any time doing sports. Even with, like, track and field, the only reason why I had much of a leg in was because I was the only person willing to learn how to do shot put or discus. And so I wasn't necessarily one of the best people on the team. In fact, I was pretty weak as far as the shot put and discus players, because I wasn't one of the football guys that would, you know, join track during the off season. But I was the only one that knew how to do it, so I was the teacher, I guess, the kind of student coach. And so that was kind of my in on being varsity. But beyond that, you know, I was not going to be winning any competitions with my weak arms. And then, oh god, what happened? The chocolate milk has turned blood. Shady sex. Creepy? Creepy. Probably didn't earn any new. It's probably the Sun Festival. Yeah, some of these are really expensive. I guess I could walk away and probably come back to 255 billion pretty quickly. If I wanted to. Maybe. Let's see. Do we want to start working on getting factories up to 100? Maybe. They don't really get me much, but the achievements are good. I should probably look at other achievements too. But so this all kind of culminated, for the most part, in me. I tried one more time with lacrosse in middle school when I moved to North Carolina, but the team was so absolutely toxic. You could only play in games and in practice if you were a 7th or 8th grader, which was like 13, 14-year-olds, or maybe it was 14, 15-year-olds. No, it was 13, 14-year-olds. And so if you were what, 12, 13, effectively, if you just entered middle school, you were not allowed to play. And they hazed these kids, like, aggressively. And so there were legitimate conversations, like, they kind of scouted me, saying, like, hey, we want you to join the team, blah, blah, blah. And I was like, okay, sure, fine. I've played lacrosse before. And I like the idea of it, you know, slinging a ball with a pole long distances. Like, that's really cool to some degree. But I remember they kind of scouted me and then hazed me a bunch. And on my way out, I remember having a conversation with the coach who very much said, like, hey, what can we do to get more people to join from your year level? Like, do you know of any other 6th graders that'd be willing to join? And I just looked up at him and I laughed because, you know, I'd never been able to even do anything. The best we were able to do was play catch. And then most of the time it was just the older students just being shitty at us. And so the 3 other 6th graders that were, you know, also on the team, they stuck with it because they were the right level of asshole to want that kind of thing. And, you know, think it's acceptable. But for me, I was just like, you know what? No. I also was only there for like 3/4 of a year, so it super was like there was no point in me sticking around. But no, I ditched that team pretty quickly, and because I was there for the end of 6th grade and then the like first half of 7th, and so I actually founded the Ultimate Frisbee club team at my middle school before the math teacher was outed for being a lesbian and chased off to a completely different state. But that's a separate thing entirely. North Carolina was not very friendly to lesbians in 2002? Maybe it was like 2003. 2004? Yeah, it was like 2002, 2003. But, you know, with that, it was just me and my friends and a couple other kind of nerdy people. We never won ever, but it was kind of fun. Because there was no pressure and there was no kind of entrenched team feeling. But anyway, I want to go back to the soccer one and the hazing and whatnot. One of my favorite stories is that this soccer team was so bad because you had your core group of, I'm going to say it was like 6 players or maybe it was 10, but, you know, not enough for a full team because you had to switch people out. You had to, you know, have enough backup players and other players just to fill spots if you needed it. Plus, I think the league required you to have so many players on the team just because to even compete. But what that meant was that the core group was just absolutely heinous to everybody else. Stealing balls, popping balls, kicking, you know, the out-group players, making fun of them, calling them names, forcing them to run more. Just shitty stuff. And, like, the coach, I don't think ever even did a damn thing to stop them from doing this. He just he didn't care. He was there to coach soccer. And the dealing with kids being awful to each other just was not part of the job description for him. So he didn't care. And, you know, to some degree, I think those positions were usually unpaid. Usually they were just like a passionate father that wanted their kid to be good at sports. But what ended up happening was the team bled players like crazy. I think we started with 20, and I think by the end of it, we were down to 12 or less. Or maybe we started at like 16 and we were down to 8. But effectively, my brother and I were the last two, like, out-group players on the team. And we quit. Right before the tournament. You know, right before states. And the thing is, this team was actually pretty good. We won most of our matches. No thanks to me. You know, these were a bunch of really motivated kids that were pretty good at soccer. But they had to have these balls and chains, and instead of, you know, figuring out how to carry the weight equally and, you know, trying to get the rest of us to actually be good or motivated at soccer, they just pushed us away constantly. And so we quit. And they didn't have enough players to compete in the tournament. And because of whatever the ruling was, they couldn't just get new players right before the tournament. So instead of going off and winning the league like they were going to very possibly do, which, like, realistically means nothing, but for these people it meant everything. But yeah, they couldn't even compete. They couldn't even go. I remember, I believe we got an angry phone call. Just one. I don't even know what happened. I'm honestly kind of shocked my mother didn't just send us off, but I think she just... Whenever I got bullied or messed with, I'm going to say my mother didn't care as much because she knew I could kind of deal with it, but my brother was a little bit more fragile at the time. So whenever he was getting bullied badly, that's when shit got real. And so yeah, we just stopped going entirely and screwed them over. And it was really nice because it's just like, it felt like the first time where I really got to enforce consequences against somebody for their ill actions. We actually ran into one of the in-group players at like a sports authority, you know, a couple weeks later, and he was kind of upset that we had ditched the tournament. Cookie chain plus 77 cookies. Oh. I see. Actually, I have to care about this. But I think afterwards, I've always just kind of had this lasting disinterest in... Oh, this is a really bad time for me to be doing the cookie chain. My eyes are very dry and kind of tired. Let's see. Here's how much this cookie chain even scales up to. Was that it? Oh, that might have been it. Fading luck. Maybe it's just kind of a luck-based thing and nothing more. No. Do I want to just get this? 2%? Yeah, it's pretty big. Taco overdose. Bam. That's like a 3 million boost right there. Can't actually tell if that's good or not. But I think ever since I've always just kind of had this like weird passing disinterest in sports that it feels kind of like the ultra rot your brain has taken hold of society in a way that will be very difficult for us to break. And who knows, maybe things have changed drastically. I'll talk more about this on the masculinity, the true masculinity episode. I might even go with that for extra clickbait, question mark. But, you know, I feel like our reaction to kids and our treatment of kids in education would be a lot better if it was divorced from the idea of sports entirely. You know, if schools did not have sports teams, they had fitness classes, you know, running, just basic, you run for a while. And all that matters is just how far you've gone. And, you know, they talk about running techniques and good shoes and, you know, how to run on a treadmill, how to run on an elliptical, how to run safely outdoors, how to run around a field, signs that you may be hurting yourself, stuff like that. You know, even at a young age, I feel like that kind of thing would be fine if kids were motivated in that direction. Or, you know, kind of pick up ultimate frisbee leagues where nobody, you know, the teams are just totally random and you just play frisbee for a while. And, you know, it's kind of enforced that you're not keeping score or anything. It's more about teamwork and improvement. Or just basic, you know, weightlifting or diet and stuff like that. You know, that's the kind of fitness classes that schools should have instead of this kind of toxic sports-focused mentality, which truly, I think, comes at the detriment of education in general. I think a lot of it just boils down to a lot of adults. A lot of adults for a while believed that sports were kind of like high-end entertainment. And I can see why, for a lot of people that maybe never had a creative hobby or, don't have a whole lot of outward passions. Or were, indoctrinated into the whole kind of, you play sports until you're in college and then you watch sports. Sports is your leisure. Once you get kind of sucked into that and that becomes your thing and your only way of having fun, after a certain point, the only way you can have fun is by living vicariously through other people playing sports, which often tends to be students playing sports. And that shit just sucks. I don't think that's healthy for anybody. It creates weird, ill expectations. Creates a lot of adults that are just going to be, being shitty and awful to their kids. Either to make them excel or to force them into going to sports or being good at sports. And then it just kind of perpetuates the cycle forever until somebody or enough people get bored that it's not profitable anymore. I don't know. It frustrates me, and I don't like sports as a result. I don't like esports either. I find there's a lot of the same kind of toxic behavior. And it's even worse to some degree because it's way less of an entrenched field. That, the job security is awful. That most people that are pro esports age out even faster, burn out faster, have more health issues. And there's a lot of predatory behaviors. I think there's still predatory behaviors with organized sports, but I think there's a little bit more oversight, and so it's safer in that direction. Maybe not. I don't know. I don't know enough about the esports scene, but it's just everything I hear about it just makes it sound kind of ugh. But with all of that said, I think this has gone on long enough. For my masculinity notes, the third note is just sports in all caps, underlined a billion times, and I just don't think I got past that. So let's get back to that topic for the next episode. But for now, thank you all so much for watching, and I will see you all on the next episode of the Cookie Cast.